Friends, greetings from the Apex Secretariat. Thank you all very much for logging into this very special debrief of APEC 2020. And what a year this has been. Challenges and uncertainties brought on by the challenges, but also a year of demonstration of grit and will. A year that clearly showed us that we need each other, that we need more international cooperation, not less. A year of learning, adapting to working in a different way. A year of reflection on how APEC as an organization can continue to push for more trade and investment, for inclusive growth, sustainable growth. APEC demonstrated its flexibility to shift its priority to response and recovery from the pandemic. Under the APEC Malaysia 2020 theme of optimizing human potential towards a resilient future of shared prosperity, pivot, prioritize progress, senior officials met 5 times this year and discussed the following priority areas: improving the narrative of trade and investment, inclusive economic partnership through the digital economy and technology, and driving innovative sustainability. Despite the pandemic, work continued virtually and intersessionally to advance the 2020 work program, as well as follow through on existing commitments and initiatives. We had a total of 6 sectoral ministerials, namely trade, finance, SME, health, women, and agriculture. We set the stage for a regional and global response. As soon as the pandemic was declared by WHO on the 11th of March, APEC started to consider how we could better facilitate the flow of medical goods and personal protective equipment across the region. Much of the focus this year was on managing the impact of the pandemic and working collaboratively towards a recovery. These included sharing information on policy initiatives and measures, keeping markets open, facilitating the flow of essential goods and services, facilitating movement of people, especially those whose work was closely linked with COVID-19 work, harnessing the opportunities of the digital economy and technologies to navigate new realities, and coordinating with counterparts and the business community, as well as with the private sector, as I mentioned, the business community and academia, to address this pandemic in a dynamic, innovative, and timely manner. Allow me to highlight 3 key deliverables from the focus areas that I just mentioned. One is the APEC COVID-19 latest and immediate virtual exchange or live campaign site for APEC member economies to have a coordinated approach to collecting and sharing of information on policies and measures taken to address the challenges of the pandemic. The declaration on facilitating the movement of essential goods. This recognized the importance of undisrupted trade flows during the pandemic and affirmed economists' commitment to a collective effort in facilitating the flow of essential goods. And third, the initiative to review measures facilitating essential movement of people across borders. The initial steps in this endeavor have commenced, and discussions are underway for the Policy Support Unit to undertake research on members' measures to facilitate essential movement of people across borders. Our Policy Support Unit also undertook 10 policy briefs and a number of studies to support the economy's initiatives. In addition, we also engaged different parts of society and recognized the contributions and innovative efforts of researchers and young entrepreneurs. The APEC Gig Economy Challenge. This was to raise awareness of the gig economy and seek solutions to improve the financial health of the gig workers. This highlighted the critical role of digitalization in fostering financial inclusion, particularly for the gig economy workers affected by the pandemic. The Apec App Challenge. This is specifically for supporting post-COVID recovery for the tourism industry. This is a joint effort of the APEC Secretariat, Google, and the Asia Foundation. Software developers and designers from 21 APEC economies were invited to create an app that can help MSMEs in the tourism industry weather the COVID-19 crisis and prepare for the eventual reopening of the tourism sector. And the APEC Healthy Women, Healthy Economies Research Prize, in partnership with Merck, we recognize the work that enables policymakers and business leaders to identify and implement measures to improve women's health in APEC so that women can join and rise in the workforce. And then finally, the Apec Prize for Innovation, Research and Education, or Aspire Award. This was to recognize the work of researchers involved in biodiversity and ecosystem services. This is particularly important contribution towards Apec Economies' efforts towards sustainable economic growth. We also looked at different parts of aspects of APEC work on women in the economy. For example, the implementation plan of the Last Arena Roadmap for Women and Inclusive Growth was endorsed by the leaders. The 2020 APEC Economic Policy Report on Structural Reform and Women's Empowerment and its recommendations was noted as well. For the SMEs, we looked at the final review of the Boracay Action Agenda, which focused on the internationalization of MSMEs. Others include the review for the Food Security Roadmap, the implementation plans for the Marine Debris Roadmap, the Illegal, Undocumented, Unregulated Fishing Roadmap. And we will see these being carried through in New Zealand's year next year. In conclusion, the successful APEC 2020 comes with two realizations. One, that it can be done. Multilateral economic cooperation and the APEC process can flourish under this new normal. 2020 was going to be a crucial year for APEC as it signaled the maturation of the BOGO goals of free and open trade and investment, and assessing of progress and reimagining APEC's objectives in the next decades. No mean feat under what used to be normal conditions. Malaysia succeeded. New Zealand's hosting year next year will carry on in this virtual format. And as we get used to meeting online, we will see more innovation to the format, and we will be able to approach our work from different angles. And secondly, in a crisis, APEC pulls together. In 2020, a year when cooperation came under threat by the great crisis, we came together and reaffirmed our commitments to each other, among other things, the joint pursuit of sustainability, inclusivity, resilience, immediately and for future generations. The APEC Business Advisory Council successfully organized the APEC CEO Dialogues this week, and the APEC Chair, Dr. Rohana, will provide you details, I'm sure. And APEC just held the first virtual APEC Economic Leaders meeting and successfully reached consensus on two important documents, as Michael indicated. I will leave the details of those outcomes to Ms. Aida Shafinas, Malaysia's senior official, who will speak on behalf of Mr. Hairil, the APEC 2020 SOM Chair. On that note, thank you so much for your attention and happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Santa Maria, for setting the scene today. What a year it's been, by design and by circumstance, but I think we all hit it head on. I'd like to turn the floor over to Dr. Dennis Hu, who will talk about the economic trends and what we need to do in APEC to build back better. Dr. Hu?
Thank you, Michael. Let me just put up my PowerPoint presentation. Right, I'd like to spend the next 10-15 minutes to talk a little bit about our APEC Regional Trends Analysis report, which was published just a few days ago, with particular focus on the impact of COVID-19 on the economic outlook of the APEC region. We can see that for the first 6 months of this year, particularly at the height of the pandemic, we've seen lockdowns, travel restrictions, closures of businesses, particularly those with face-to-face interactions, supply chain disruptions, and that has led to a significant impact on the economy. For the first 6 months of this year, the APEC region contracted by about 3.7%, and we can see its impact on particularly private consumption, which has always been a reliable source of growth for the region, as well as for investments. We can see that reflections and contractions also in terms of exports and imports, both in volume as well as value terms. We've seen significant contractions both in the exports and imports of merchandise goods and services. The WTO itself projects for the full year 2020 a 9.2% drop in terms of the volume of global merchandise trade. That contraction in trade is further compounded, particularly in services. We see that a sizable decline in commercial services, that's reflecting the toll that's taken on border closures as well as stay-at-home measures due to COVID-19. Some statistics in terms of the services sector, its impact particularly on travel and tourism. International tourist arrivals plunged by about 65% during the first half of 2020. That translates to a loss of about $460 billion in terms of export revenues in international tourism. So for the full year of 2020, we're looking at the region contracting by about 2.5%. That translates to about $1.8 trillion in output losses. That's pretty much in tandem with the global economy. The IMF has forecast that the global economy will contract by about 4.4% this year. In terms of other types of forecasts, the UNCTAD itself is looking at a contraction of foreign direct investment inflows to the global economy, some within the range of 30 to 40%. In terms of next year, we're looking at a recovery in the global economy as well as for the Apac region of about 5.2%. The IMF itself is forecasting over the medium term much more modest average GDP growth rates of about 3.5%. And that, in terms of implication, would dial back on the progress that's made in improvements in living standards as well as poverty alleviation that's been made over the last couple of decades. In terms of what APEC Economies has been doing to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, we see a whole slew of fiscal measures targeting at supporting healthcare systems, households, as well as businesses, particularly micro, small, medium enterprises. Again, we see that also being applied by central banks as well as monetary authorities, both in cutting interest rates, providing sufficient liquidity in the market, and ensuring that financial markets remain strong and stable. Inflation rates for the first 9 months of this year has been relatively benign, about 1.5%. What we find is that central banks have kept interest rates for most APEC economies. They've either cut interest rates or they've kept interest rates relatively unchanged. Now, the pandemic's not over. If you look at this chart here, which also is shown in our APEC in Charts 2020 which publication, which is also out a few days ago, the number of cases continues to be quite pretty high. The latest statistics that I have is total global cases is roughly about 52.6 million. About a third of those global infections are coming from the Asia Pacific region. And we are beginning to see as well a second wave of cases, particularly in Europe. And that has led to some reimposition of some lockdowns, particularly at the city level or regional level. And I'll talk a little bit about that in my next 1 or 2 slides. I mean, the pandemic itself we've got about 9-10 months of trying to examine and analyze the implications and impact of COVID-19. And what we see, for example, is that it has essentially exacerbated pre-existing challenges that the region are facing. That includes challenges on environmental degradation, pre-existing concerns of growing income inequality, as well as the digital divide and some of the digital challenges that we face. In terms of environmental degradation, we've seen that the concerns of environmental damage, for example, deforestation and others, or changes in climate patterns, has increased the exposure of different types of infectious disease to humans. So this is one of the areas of concerns. We also seen that COVID-19 has exacerbated some of the concerns of waste management. We've seen increased use of single-use plastics, for example, whether it's for medical goods or for disposable plastic containers, since everyone is basically, particularly during the lockdown period when people are essentially ordering food and other types of things from home. In terms of inequality, we've seen that the COVID-19 has hit the hardest on the most vulnerable segments of society. It's particularly magnified in among the poor, among women, ethnic minorities, indigenous groups, as well as other vulnerable groups. So we've seen that persistent poverty and barriers to access to healthcare, to skills training, to education, as well as other economic opportunities interact with the virus, resulting in severe public health and economic outcomes. Again, for the youth, there's a big concern of education and as well as skills being delayed and as well as a lack of economic opportunities. What you worry about in terms of the medium term and longer term is a lost generation from our younger generation. Digital challenges, again, we've seen that an increased applications of digital technologies and digital platforms during this period. Many of us are working from home. We've seen an increased use of video conferencing like this briefing that we're having today, as well as applications of whether it's online groceries and other types of digital platforms. But that leads to a separate set of challenges coming from the increased use of digital technology. That includes concerns of data privacy, cybersecurity, as well as digital fraud. As we move forward, I think what we can do is look at to build a much more resilient Asia-Pacific regional economy. We need to invest in green jobs as well as infrastructure, including digital infrastructure. We need to ensure that the policies that we move forward ensure equitable access to healthcare, education, infrastructure, as well as technology. And we need to find ways to maximize the potential from the digital economy, keeping in mind that we need to tackle the set of challenges that arise from these increased digital transformation of the economy. So this is my last slide. In many ways, APEC policymakers are in a difficult position, I'm an economist, and we tend to look at it in terms of trade-off. If you continue to prolong restrictions and other types of lockdowns, there is concerns of economic scarring, particularly concerns of long-term unemployment, particularly, as well as increased number of bankruptcies. You open the economies too soon, of course, then you risk the resurgence of infections, and we're beginning to see some of that happening in Europe and other parts of the world. What remains crucial is to look at we continue to look at the effective containment of the pandemic, continued fiscal and monetary measures if APEC economies have the fiscal and monetary space, and the importance of regional cooperation. We've just completed a very successful Malaysia year, and I think there is a growing sense of urgency of working together and coordinating among member economies, whether it's in terms of information sharing or looking at different types of measures, keeping supply chains open, trying to emphasize the facilitation of movement of goods, particularly essential goods, medical goods, as well as essential food staples. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hugh. We appreciate the insightful presentation and see that COVID-19 has dominated the discussion this year, but there's been a host of other issues that APEC has addressed as well. We'd like to thank those of you who've recently joined us we'd like to welcome those of you who've recently joined us in the room. We will make this presentation available on the APEC website after the briefing. Now we'd like to turn it over to Dr. Rohana Mahmood, who will discuss the business community's recommendations to ministers and leaders this year. Dr. Rohana?
Thank you very much, Michael. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Very, very warm greetings from Kuala Lumpur. Let me start by congratulating all of us here, and I mean all of us here, for a job well done. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank Tan Sri Rebecca Santa Maria and her team at APEC Secretariat. You guys have been a pillar to all of us during those challenging times. you know, and also thank you for the opportunity this morning to brief the media, the diplomatic corps, the academia, and others on APEC's recommendations for 2020 to APEC economic leaders. I would also like to do a quick shout out to Bengalis, Tikanis, Bengalis, and then also to Ida. Ida, I don't know whether you've slept. I know we haven't, so don't know whether you've slept. What a year this has been. I feel like as if I can bring into a song or something, you know, from, what's it from? Brigadoon, song from Brigadoon. We started the year, this is, you know, I told the APEC Ministerial meeting the same thing as well. You know, this has been we started the year with a positive outlook. And you know, we were briefed by this wonderful lady from JP Morgan in Sydney who told us, you know, there'll be problems, but not to worry about this. And, you know, global growth was expected to improve in 2020. The coronavirus initially mildly will affect near-term GDP with considerable maybe downside risk. Hello, this was not the case. This is not the case. 8 months later, it was a scenario that no one expected. Most economies had to impose wide lockdowns, and as a result, businesses came to a still and economic growth stall. Can you imagine where APEC Malaysia and APEC Malaysia was at that point in time, figuring out, you know, the necessity to sort of shift from a physical meeting onto a virtual meeting, but we did, and was a lot of anxiety and a lot of trepidation on our part. You know, this year is not just challenging for the public health security, but economies right across the APEC region is now projected to contract to the tune of about 5.2%. I think only China, People's Republic of China, will be having positive growth. Now, the challenges of both the pandemic and the economy has been devastating for all of us. And I don't want to go through the details of what we had to do initially, but APEC did one thing. We decided that we had to write to the ministers. We came out with a COVID-19 report. And for us at APEC, that was the turning point, the trigger that got us working, immediately understanding the critical supply chains that needed to be open, where 97% of all our businesses, which is MIS, micro, small, medium enterprises, were going to be impacted. And then we had to look at all these things. We came out with a report, and it was very well received by ministers, senior officials, and leaders as well. And then building on the letter and building on our report, we then, after that, turned our attention back to the APEC work program of 2020. And we had to modify our theme a little bit to, well, the theme is integration, innovation, inclusion, moving towards economic recovery and resilience, to take account into the realities of what was happening to all of us in the region. We have since submitted our APEC letter and report to leaders, which note the unprecedented challenges posed by the pandemic, and we highlighted the need clearly for cooperation and collaboration in order for us to rebuild, revitalize our economies, and put them all back on track for economic recovery. Now, the recommendation to leaders was principally based on our three priorities. Now, I'd like to share with you our key messages to leaders. I had the opportunity to hand over the report directly to my Prime Minister, and we had a good chat. Clearly, at the end of the chat, we realized that governments will have to work with the private sector. And COVID-19 is not going to go anywhere, not in the immediate future. We will have the vaccine, but for the economic recovery, it'll take longer than I suspect. Now, on the first key priority that we recommended to leaders was on integration. APEC believes that free and open trade and investment are key to a return to growth. We urge APEC leaders to prioritize pro-trade and pro-investment policies, including enhancing open, secure, and stable supply chains. In our view, We want a region that responds collectively to shared challenges, a region that values connections between us, including free and open trade, and a dynamic digital economy. We also underscored to the leaders the importance of a well-functioning WTO that is credible, fit for purpose, relevant, reflecting evolving business needs. And I see that reflected in the leaders' declaration, and I'm delighted. I tell you, I'm really delighted and very, very happy to see that. On innovation, the pandemic, as we all know, has dramatically demonstrated the importance of digital innovation and enabling digital innovation and connectivity. And this is important. The societies have responded to the pandemic by moving their essential daily activities online where possible. But while this has helped to sustain communities, it has also highlighted the risk of a digital divide and geographic and along geographic and socio-economic lines. Therefore, we call on leaders to ensure that digital infrastructure, including broadband, is accessible even in underdeveloped areas, and that the regulatory and technological environment is open, non-discriminatory, and coherent across APEC to enable innovation, interoperability, and more rapid digitalization for all. On inclusion, key element of the leaders' declaration as well, and the vision, the Putrajaya vision. On inclusion, we urge leaders to take the opportunity provided by the pandemic to address the issues of more equitable sharing of the opportunities in and benefits of trade and regional prosperity, including ensuring micro, small, medium enterprises, women, indigenous communities, underrepresented groups, youth are all not left behind. And this will help enhance our collective resilience. On sustainability, we underscored the need to take steps to revise dramatic decline in the health of our planet, and we should prepare for greater environmental challenges, including strengthening international cooperation to mitigate and adapt to climate as a matter of urgency, and to foster the transition to a low carbon economy. I noticed two key economies, Japan and China, have both made an announcement by 2050 and 2060. But we need to do much more. I mean, we really need to do much more. And I think we need to encourage innovative solutions and the development of the uptake of renewable energy. I look forward to New Zealand's year, because this is very, very important to New Zealand, and they need to push the rest of the Asia Pacific on this issue. On the Post Vision 2020, I cannot tell you how happy I am that we have Putrajaya Vision 2040. APEC noted that the COVID pandemic has underscored the value of a collective vision for the coming years, one that incorporates the concepts of resilience and cooperation. Once again, the effect of COVID-19 has shown that free and open trade and investment are crucial to our collective well-being. Now, if I can just highlight the key learnings and realization from COVID-19 pandemic that impacted all of us, is the value and relevance of the work that we do in APEC and in APEC. We must step up cooperation and collaboration. That was the key message in our letter and in our report to leaders. If we are to overcome current challenges and remain resilient against those yet to come. Now, on the APEC on the APEC CEO dialogues, sometimes I have to tell you that I had my heart and my throat most of the time, I think. But we did very well against all odds. And I have received a lot of comments that they found the CEO dialogue for the very first time, a virtual meeting. And we had 9 APEC leaders participate, and this is a record. And we had incredible sessions, not just the APEC economic leaders, we had thought leaders, global CEOs, and we had a variety of spotlight panels. So it's something that we need to do, and we worry about it, but it came out smashingly well. The APEC economic leaders, a lot of them acknowledge APEC and the work that APEC is doing. The Japanese Prime Minister noted that APEC's strength comes from APEC. APEC governments must work hand in glove with business and private sector to propel the region back on track for economic recovery. Prime Minister of New Zealand, the incoming APEC chair for 2021, in her opening remarks started, now more than ever, APEC's voice in APEC should remain strong as business and government collaborate to support economic recovery. So Tan Sri Rebecca, I don't want to say too much because, you know, it's we're still trying to understand what we did and how well we did. This is not the time to bask in glory, but I think it's important that we managed to get the key messages out that as far as we're concerned, there is no two ways about APEC economies coming together, working together, growing together to achieve the kind of successes we have. So on that note, I thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rohana. What is unique about APEC is its ability to engage with the business community, and the APEC Business Advisory Council is a unique group that allows us to do that so well. With that, let's hear from Malaysia's APEC senior official, Ida Safinez Alias, who will give us an overview of the 2020 deliverables, including the Kuala Lumpur Declaration and the APEC Putrajaya Vision for 2040. Ida?
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, Excellencies, Executive Director of the APEC Secretariat, Tan Sri Rebecca, media friends, Datuk Rohana, ladies and gentlemen. Before I go into my updates, I'd like to convey the regards of the APEC 2020 SOM Chair, Mr. Hairil Yahri Yaakob, who's not able to join us today due to pre-arranged commitments. It is indeed an honor to share the updates of the key outcomes and achievements for APEC 2020. These comprise of all the substantive work concluded for the year, including the recently concluded APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, AELM. Guided by the APEC 2020 theme of optimizing human potential towards a resilient future of shared prosperity, pivot, prioritize, progress, member economies advanced work in support of the following priority areas. 1, improving the narrative of trade and investment. 2, inclusive economic participation through digital economy and technology. And 3, driving innovative sustainability. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has profound impact on Malaysia's host year with its unprecedented challenges. This required adjustments to the work plan and deliverables for APEC 2020. Despite this, with the full support and cooperation from economies, Malaysia forged ahead and continued work virtually and intersessionally to advance the 2020 work program. I must say that the tenacity, passion, and dedication of everyone, including all economies and stakeholders, made it possible to effectively progress and deliver the deliverables for this year. We have successfully convened close to 70 meetings virtually since July this year. This is in addition to more than 85 meetings that were hosted physically in the first quarter of the year. Most importantly, first time in the history of APEC, the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting convened in fully virtual format on 20th of November 2020. This meeting saw the strong participation of all the APEC economic leaders, save for Mexico, reiterating the relevance of APEC in the global front. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, gives me immense pleasure to announce that the APEC economic leaders have successfully adopted the APEC Putrajaya Vision 2040 and the Kuala Lumpur Declaration, two key deliverables for Malaysia this year. Malaysia takes pride in successfully architecting these documents together with all the APEC economies. The APEC Putrajaya vision of an open, dynamic, resilient, and peaceful Asia-Pacific community by 2040 for the prosperity of all people and future generations is the landmark document that will be the source of reference and foundation for APEC and will define our work in the next phase of regional economic integration. I must say that this is a carefully balanced document that brings together the priorities of all APEC economies into a single document. The vision contains the right mix of ingredients for us to meaningfully respond to the current and future challenges that the region is most likely to face. It also considers the fact that we will be spending at least the next couple of years to undo the devastating impact of the pandemic. It recognizes that future economic drivers for growth will need to take into account a post-pandemic period before a positive trajectory can be expected. It also acknowledges the need for innovation and digitalization to take center stage in our economic recovery process. The vision also heightens our focus on inclusive economic growth and the well-being of all people. It places a specific emphasis on economic growth that is inclusive, innovative, balanced, sustainable, and secure. Human resource development, particularly through capacity building and technical assistance, have also been incorporated into this vision, as demand-driven economic and technical cooperation will be pivotal for economies to cultivate the right skill set for their people. The APEC Putrajaya Vision 2040 expands the breadth and depth of work of APEC economies to ensure that the economic outcomes pursued by the region are translated into prosperity that is palpable to all segments of the society. Building on the success of the BOGO goals, we will work to chart a new era for APEC to ensure that we remain the premier economic forum in the Asia Pacific. In the Kuala Lumpur Declaration, a document that had remained elusive for the past 2 years, leaders noted the importance of a free, open, non-discriminatory, transparent, and predictable trade and investment environment to drive economic recovery, and reaffirmed support for the ongoing work at the World Trade Organization, including through necessary reforms aimed at improving its functioning. The leaders also called for an enabling environment that supports the development of digital economy, as well as inclusive economic policies to facilitate post-pandemic regional recovery and growth. In the Kuala Lumpur Declaration, leaders highlighted the need to facilitate equitable access to safe, effective, and affordable vaccines. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm also proud to announce that we have successfully organized 6 sectoral ministerial meetings, namely trade, health, finance, women, SME, and food security, which led to the issuance of 7 joint ministerial statements. This was the very first time in the history of APEC that all these ministerial level meetings were convened in a fully virtual format. Most importantly, we have convened the APEC ministerial meeting that led to the issuance of a joint ministerial statement. This statement highlighted the role of trade and investment in navigating the region along a path of robust economic recovery post-pandemic. The APEC ministers made it a priority to improve the narrative of trade and investment by translating these elements into inclusive economic growth that brought tangible benefits and greater well-being to people. They also emphasized on the need to enhance access to opportunities stemming from the digital economy, in addition to reaffirming support for economic and technical cooperation, particularly for micro, small, and medium enterprises, women, and vulnerable groups. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have also convened extraordinary meetings. These resulted in important outcomes for the year, including the Declaration on Facilitating the Movement of Essential Goods in APEC, proposal to review measures facilitating essential movement of people, and APEC COVID-19 Live campaign site. There were also discussion on additional resources to support post-COVID-19 recovery. In addition to these outcomes throughout the year, substantive work were also concluded by APEC's senior officials, committees, and subfora. These were also noteworthy initiatives endorsed at the sectoral ministerial meetings and high-level policy dialogues. Under each of the priority areas, there are several significant deliverables achieved for APEC 2020. Among others include some level dialogue on beyond GDP, pursuing well-being in the COVID-19 era, 2020 APEC Economy Policy Report, Structural Reform and Women's Empowerment, Implementation Plan for the La Serena Roadmap for Women and Inclusive Growth, APEC Internet and Digital Economy Roadmap AIDER Work Program, Final Consolidated 2016 to 2020 Boracay Action Agenda BAA Stocktake on MSMEs Development, Public-Private Dialogue on Innovative Waste Management, and Review of the APEC Food Security Roadmap towards 2020. On the multi-year initiatives, we managed to complete the key documents for APEC 2020, namely the final assessment of the Bogor Goals, APEC Connectivity Blueprint Midterm Review, and the final assessment of APEC Strategy for Strengthening Quality Growth. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that Malaysia would not have achieved such remarkable outcomes if it was not for the unwavering support and commitment of all senior officials and their team, as well as all the stakeholders. This has contributed towards a successful year for not only Malaysia, but APEC. With that, terima kasih for giving me this opportunity to provide an update on the outcomes of APEC 2020.
Thank you, Ida, for that summary, and congratulations to you and your team for such a tremendous accomplishment during this challenging time. We're looking forward to the next step of how the APEC Putrajaya Vision 2040 will be put towards implementation. We've now come to the 2021 chair of the APEC senior officials, Mr. Vangelis Vitalis, who will be leading the technical discussions and policy development as New Zealand takes over for 2021. He will provide some context for what we can expect next year. Vangelis, kia ora, and please, over to you.
Kia ora, Michael. Kia ora, Michael. Thank you very much. Michael, can I now ask you to press play on the New Zealand handover video, and then I'll make some remarks once we've had an opportunity to see that introductory video.
Kia ora. I'm Jaden from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Kia ora is a Māori word for saying hello, down here in the economy that is lucky enough to be hosting Apec 2021. Just not actually down here. Kia ora means more than hello. It means welcome as a friend. And it also means thank you. And it is with sincere thanks that we acknowledge the way that our friends in Malaysia have stepped up to meet the challenges faced under COVID-19 and kept Apec going virtually this year during the global pandemic. Great job, everyone. Like you, we were ready to welcome everyone to our homes, to give representatives of all 21 Apec economies a taste of who we are. But also like you, we are determined to support the global COVID response. And that's why you're viewing us like this, virtually. So, now it's time for us to introduce ourselves. Are you ready? Let's go. Welcome to your virtual introduction to Aotearoa, New Zealand. We are a place of open spaces with fertile, productive land. Oh, yum. Monique, say some for me. This land gives us the space to dream and think clearly and differently. Isn't that right, Peter?
For us, it's not so much technologies that have been developed in New Zealand, but more so the very, very clever and educated people with the New Zealand attitude of happy to kind of push the boundaries.
Far out! We are people of open hearts, where you will be welcomed as part of a community that believes in bringing people together. This is how we will all join together. We are people of open minds, where different views are shared and supported, and hard work and teamwork is encouraged. Go, 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 go! Go, Donuts! Woohoo! This is how we will all work together. All the while embracing and leading technology that helps push the world forward positively, and without limits. Boats that fly, what's next? Whoa. This is how we will all grow together. Join, work, grow together. Pretty important words, aren't they, Prime Minister?
They really are, Jaden. As we plan for recovery from COVID-19, it is economic cooperation through Apec, the most dynamic region in the world's economy, that will help us all rebuild. Like never before, the scale of the challenges the world faces today requires us all to work together for the greater good. We will create an environment where connections can be made and Apec's important work can continue, including progress on sustainability, ensuring widespread adoption of digital tools to drive productivity, and developing inclusive plans that create opportunities for all our people. The way we respond as a region to today's challenges will be felt for generations to come. Apec 2021 New Zealand will be the start of reigniting growth, continuing trade, and setting a plan for long-lasting recovery across the entire region. To all the 2021 Apec delegates, we look forward to providing a warm welcome to Aotearoa, New Zealand, virtually, as we join, work, grow together.
Haumie, huie, tai kie.
So thank you very much. That was our it's our sort of introductory video for our host year, if you like. What I thought I would do is I'd speak in sort of four parts. One, very briefly sketch the context that we see for our year and how, if I may say so, how difficult that is. Although if I may also say, Malaysia has made it a little bit easier for us because of the very successful year that they've had, as you've just heard. Then I wanted to cover the New Zealand priorities and to leave you with three particular elements. A focus on recovery, a focus on resilience, and a focus on innovation. Then I want to introduce the New Zealand theme, which actually has already been introduced here, but maybe to explain a little bit about how we came to that theme, and then some concluding observations. So look, let me start though, most importantly by thanking various people. First of all, Malaysia. You really have left, well, you have left us with very large shoes now to fill and a very daunting set of responsibilities. As you said, Ida, the very significant achievement So you've listed a number of them. If I may say so, the ones that really stand out is the vision. And that really does set up actually not just New Zealand's host year, but I think all of us for the next 20 years, because that is the document that we now need to convert together into an action plan. Without that, we would have had an enormous challenge. So thank you for that. But also a leader's statement, and then those 7 ministerial statements. You know, in a sense, what Malaysia has been able to do is grip up a very challenging year and yet deliver consensus statements. That is in itself extremely, unfortunately, unusual. But if I may say so, I'm hoping that a bit of the Malaysian magic rubs off on the New Zealand year, because we really want to have some consensus statements next year as well. So thank you very much for that, Ida. To your team, I know none of you have slept in the last, well, probably several weeks now, but also my best to Khairul as well. And of course to all the leaders and so on. I know my Prime Minister said all that in the early hours of our Saturday morning. My second big thank you is to you, Dr. Rebecca, and the team, the APEC team. This work cannot happen without you. This institution that you lead is a public good for our region and absolutely crucial. And I really look forward, I personally look very much forward to working with you. To you too, Dr. Hugh, I was fascinated by your thing. I'm now a big reader of APEC material and I'm really enjoying it as an economist, not just a trade person. I really did enjoy that presentation, which made me think hard about some of the trade-offs that we're all having to grapple with. But my third thank you is actually to you, Dr. Rohana. So it was a wonderful discovery that Dr. Rohana, of course, speaks Greek. But I did want to say how grateful I am for the way in which ABAC really picked up the challenge this year and supported not just Malaysia, but the whole membership, and kept reminding us how important this institution is, that it matters no matter where we are, whether we're sitting in Geneva, whether we're negotiating trade agreements. The APEC vision and the APEC purpose that comes out of the ABAC material really resonates. And I can assure you people pay attention, and I can absolutely assure you that we will, as Malaysia so effectively did, we'll be listening to you for advice, for good suggestions, for creative ideas, because that is going to be the measure of our success next year. So to all three, Malaysia, the APEC Secretariat, and of course the ABAC and under your leadership, Dr. Rohana, thank you very much. If I can now turn to the context as we are now looking at the world, I guess 4 observations. The first is, and a very obvious one, the global shock, the global economic shock. And Dr. Hugh, you very neatly gave us a sense of that. The striking thing for me is this is a global shock that has a demand dimension and a supply dimension. That poses real challenges to all of us as we think about what the next year is going to look like, both in terms of supply lines, in terms of price, in terms of where production is going to happen, how it needs to happen, and how the various hubs around our region are going to distribute products. So that global shock element, which I'm afraid we're not over yet, is going to be an important contextual element. The second contextual element I wanted to identify is the fragmentation of the rules-based system. That is something that I think is deeply troubling to all of us, and I was really pleased listening to leaders over the weekend, the emphasis that they put on the importance of the rules-based system. So that challenge that we face, the pressures that are bearing down on those international trade rules, particularly the international trading system, I think what we need to do in APEC in our year is think about how this institution, which is kind of like an ecosystem that supports and sustains the rule-based system, can drive that forward. Look, the third thing that I think is a contextual element that we are thinking hard about is public support for international trade. I think there is a little bit of an unease out there as a result of COVID. People are anxious about, the imports, the products that they consume. Are they healthy? Are they safe? What is it we can do as we think about our year that would support and reassure our public about the importance, actually? Because if there is one thing that came out of this crisis, it is, as many of you have already said, In the case of a crisis, what you need is more cooperation, not less, and trade is an absolutely vital part of that. So in our year, for example, we are hopeful that we'll be able to do a food security focused meeting, because we know how important that is to many economies around the region. Look at the final contextual point before I come to the big themes or priorities for us, is of course protectionism. And protectionism is on the rise internationally. Our region is not immune from that, whether it is economies within our institution acting in that way, or economies outside of the institution behaving in ways that, of course, make things very challenging for our membership. So thinking about what that looks like, how we might respond, I think is going to be a real key part of the way we think about not just next year, but the next 3 to 5 years, I would argue. So look, that brings me to the next segment of my remarks, which is really to introduce our broad themes. They really are the recovery, the resilience, and the innovation piece. Those three are very hard to separate out because they're very closely interrelated. But look, essentially what I think we're looking to do, and the New Zealand Cabinet is still considering all of these, but we're hoping that we'll be looking in the recovery context at the trade and economic policies that we need to drive that recovery and to take us forward there. The presentation that we heard at the start very nicely highlighted the breadth and depth of the challenge to the recovery that we all face. That's to market access, it's to the supply chains, it's to the resilience, it's to sustainability. It's of course a big challenge to inclusion as well. So we have some quite big issues that we're going to need to think about very hard in the recovery space, which brings me to the resilience space, where I think the way we were trying to think about it is building back better, definitely, but building back greener and more inclusively to make that recovery a really resilient and sustainable one that goes on beyond just a year or 2 years, but really is out 3 to 5. And here, if I may say so, it becomes really crucial that we think hard about many of the things that Malaysia and Chile and indeed Papua New Guinea have already picked up, and build on that foundation. By this, I mean the women, the work around women empowerment, the work about the Indigenous communities, about small and medium enterprises. All of those elements, I think, will feature very prominently in the way that we want to do things. But as I said, building on the work of the last 3 chairs with whom I've had the privilege of having several sessions now to talk about, how do we leverage that? How do we take that all forward? But the absolute, perhaps the most important part of the resilience piece, I would argue, is the work that the 21 members will do next year together to convert the vision into the action agenda. That is absolutely crucial. There is no more important task for us in New Zealand than to convert the vision into the document that will then drive the membership's work program over the next 20 plus years. That Putrajaya vision of 2040 really is going to be the fundamental thing that we all will be using as our reference point as we move into the future. And so that's my, that will be a very, very strong focus for me, will be that conversion. And I'm looking forward to working with all members about how we make that meaningful and real, but in a very practical and substantive way to ensure that we really are driving recovery and resilience. That brings me to the innovation piece. The innovation and the digital piece, I think, is going to be really important. If there's one thing we've learned from COVID, is that the digital sphere is a real driver now, both of productivity, both of efficiency, but crucially too, of engagement. So as all of our economies struggle with their international connectivity, and I come from an economy that's got a particularly serious problem in terms of distance from our markets, which has been made even more difficult as a consequence of COVID. This is something we're clearly going to be very, very focused on. So what is it we can do there? What substantively will, if you like, as they say in English, shift the dial for businesses around the region that will really push things forward? Clearly things like electronic certification, signatures, these kinds of fundamental building blocks of the international and the regional trading system, I think you'll find APEC looking to do some very interesting work around there. And speaking of innovation, of course, and this is where the responsibility falls very heavily on New Zealand, is we have had a chance, unlike Malaysia, we have had a chance to plan for a virtual year. So we know that we are hosting a virtual year. So there are no excuses for New Zealand. We will be making a virtual year, and our objective is to make that as familiar as possible for all of our APEC partners, so that it looks and feels as much as possible like a normal APEC year in the way we have grown accustomed with, thanks to Malaysia's chairing of the latter part of this year. So we are committed to trying to make that work, and I think we have very high expectations of ourselves for that. And in that innovation space, I should add the responsibility that we feel to the membership to really deliver substantive outcomes that will add value to our region, again, to drive the recovery, the resilience, and the innovation piece. And that brings me to the theme. So New Zealand's theme, as you heard our Prime Minister and Jaden, the actor that was leading this, it's join, work, grow together. And in Maori, that phrase, those words are haumie, huie, taikie. And I want to explain a little bit about how we came to those terms. So the indigenous population of New Zealand, the Maori population, are famous traders. And when their communities came together, they would build these ocean-going waka, they're called. They're canoes, really big ocean-going ones that could travel enormous distances around the Pacific and trading around the region. That is where the phrase haumie, huie, taikie is around. It's that sense of community that works together, that grows together, and that then joins together to make success. And we thought that was a very good way of capturing the APEC ethos and the spirit of what it is we are going to be trying to do in our year. So let me finish there. I hope I've given you a sense of how we're thinking about the global context, the four big challenges we see out there, and the things we were looking to do within that. I think I've also introduced to you the key areas that we'll be focusing around: the recovery, the resilience, the innovation, and the digital piece all together. But above all, the join, work, grow together, that's not just a slogan for us, that will be the guiding principle for us throughout our year, working with all of our 20 other APEC economies, absolutely committed to it. Haumie, huie, taikie, and a very, very warm welcome from me to 2021, which is going to be the New Zealand host year, albeit virtually. Thank you again.
Thank you, Vangelis, for that introduction to APEC New Zealand. We appreciate the great video with the message from Prime Minister Ardern as well. Thank you so much for sharing the themes and priorities that we should expect next year. We'd also like to thank all of the speakers for your presentations and insights today. Now we've come to the Q&A discussion component of this session. We'd like to ask the audience to please share your questions in the Q&A tool at the bottom of the screen. First, we have a question from Sarah of the business community. How will Malaysia ensure a smooth transition to New Zealand on the hosting of APEC 2021? And I think that we could first direct that to Ida and Dr. Rohana from the policy side and the business side. Ida, may I start with you?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Michael, for the question. Sarah, for the question. When we started our host year, we have already been in communication through the Troika process in coming up with the zero draft of the Putrajaya, what is eventually the Putrajaya Vision 2040. A few other things. In fact, when we were halted for a second by the pandemic, we were also in touch with New Zealand and also Thailand, future hosts, in strategizing on what to do next. And when we had gone through the drafting process of the Putrajaya Vision, we are of the same understanding that this year we will develop the vision, and next year New Zealand will take over the coming up with the implementation plan of the vision. And therefore, in that way, we were in tune. We knew also from when it was handed to us by Chile that the themes and the work program of the hosting year should flow from year to year, and so that we have been from the get-go been working together with New Zealand.
Thank you, Ida. Dr. Rohana, would you care to share how the business community will transition its work program to New Zealand?
Yep, thank you very much, Michael. Like Apac, Apac, we too have the Troika, outgoing chair, incoming chair, and the current chair. So I've been working very, very closely with the incoming chair from New Zealand, Rachel Taulale, a wonderful lady, and I'm afraid she's going to push, Bengali, she's going to push you really, really hard on getting things done. And their theme this year is very appropriate. You know, we carry parts of what Chile was doing, and then I suspect New Zealand is going to do the same thing. Their theme of people, place, and prosperity is so important in what's happening today. And as part of the Troika, there will always be that cooperation with Malaysia and then incoming chair Thailand as well. So I think we'll do that. And the way that New Zealand has done the governance process, we will all, it's not, you know, we will ensure that the right issues, key critical business issues, your Prime Minister of New Zealand said it so correctly. I think the voice of business is critical for APEC to succeed. Now, when I was on Friday night, when I was with the New Zealand High Commissioner at the official opening of the economic leaders meeting on Friday, I just told her, listen, our job is done. We've got the vision. You guys have to implement it. You guys have so much work. The action agenda plan of, I don't know, whether it's Auckland or Wellington or whatever you're going to call it. But be rest assured that it is very important, not just this year for Malaysia, but the New Zealand year is as important to ensure that the agenda is laid out and that we deliver and get the job done. And because of the nature of APEC, I think we'll get it done and we'll all work very, very closely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rohana and Ida, for sharing that information. We have a comment from His Excellency Suryo Pratomo from Indonesia. Ambassador?
So, thank you, Michael. First of all, I want to convey my sincere thanks to Dr. Rohana Mahfud and also Ms. Aida Safinas for sharing the key outcome from APEC leaders. And also thank you to Dennis Yu to have already give us the insightful about our challenges in economic development in the future. I would like to congratulate Malaysia as APEC 2020 host and chairmanship, and Malaysia have done very well even in the difficult situation. Ms. Aida have already mentioned you can organize 17 meetings since July, and the result is very tremendously. And also I'm also would congratulate to all Apec economies for successful adopting the post-2020 vision called as Apec Putrajaya Vision 2040. This vision will further advance the Bogor goal that was launched by Apec leaders in 1994. As highlighted by President Joko Widodo at the Apec leaders meeting, several major breakthroughs from Bogor goals that remain relevant to current global situation. The President Joko Widodo also stressed the importance of strengthening open market system and multilateralism, especially when we are facing the hardest situation because of pandemic COVID-19 and also the recession that we are facing since 2008, a financial crisis. In this regard, Indonesia is committed to working together with other Apec members to achieve the Apec Putrajaya Vision 2040. Finally, we are very pleased and happy that New Zealand will be the host for the next Apec meeting. New Zealand we know as the beautiful and peaceful country, but hopefully, Mr. Vitalis, we are not only meeting in virtually. We hope that we can go to New Zealand and meeting in your country. So thank you so much, Michael.
Terima kasih, Pak. Thank you for your comments. We have another question from Bennett Shore of the business community. What is Apec's economic and supply chain strategy to quickly produce and distribute and administer future COVID-19 vaccines among Apec economies? Really, this is a question about our supply chain strategy. Dr. Hugh, might you want to start?
Sure. I think it's also mentioned in the leaders' declaration the importance of distribution of and test of including therapeutics and vaccines. And what I'd like to say is that we do have existing supply chain connectivity initiatives as part of the APEC Connectivity Blueprint, which we just conducted a midterm review. So it's a question of really refocusing that on, particularly given the fact that we're still in the middle of a pandemic, so refocusing the work that we're doing in ensuring that the goods are able to go across border, particularly essential medical goods such as vaccines and other types of medical products and goods. So what I'm saying is that we do have existing strategies, particularly on supply chains. It's a question of just refocusing the work that we're doing given the current climate that we're in.
Ida, would you care to add?
Okay, I just want to highlight one of the major deliverable for this year is the declaration on the facilitating movement of essential goods. And when we're talking about essential goods here, we refer to medical supplies, we refer to drugs, and also food and agriculture products. And so there we already have an initiative in APEC. But just to go in further on the 2020 Kuala Lumpur Declaration, we're talking about the supply chain. In the declaration, it really does think about the whole supply chain, really, when they say that they recognize that science, technology, and innovation is important in handling COVID-19, and also they need to cooperate, economies need to cooperate constructively, starting from R&D, production, manufacturing, and distribution, diagnostic tests, and then medical products, services, therapeutics, and vaccines as what has been said. But also there is a note on the importance on facilitating the equitable access of safe, quality, effective, affordable vaccines. And also I want to point out that the leaders had also acknowledged the need to support developing economies in combating COVID-19. And so there, I think there is enough meat there for the next year, I mean, the following years, that the health working group within APEC, the PPSTI working group within APEC can take up to get this going further. Thank you, Michael.
Michael, can I say something?
Thank you, Ida. Yes, of course, Dr. Rohana, please.
Thank you, Michael. No, paragraph 7 of the leaders' declaration made it very, very clear that they reaffirm to cooperate constructively on this, and that they highlight the importance of facilitating equitable access. So I think what Danny said is absolutely spot on. I think that this is where the role of the private sector will come in together with government to ensure that you will have that supply that will go in. Of course, the logistics is going to be a nightmare. But this is one area I think New Zealand, in implementing this, will have to look at very closely with all the 21 economies. When you have when you have 17,000 islands in Indonesia alone, so it's going to be a challenge. But the leaders' declaration is very clear, and we look forward to ensuring that we get this done. I think that this will be one of the key tests for our effective collaboration and cooperation. Thank you very much.
Michael, if I can just add, the whole idea in APEC is the collaboration that you have. So it's not just business and the policymakers, but also the health experts. So you've got the health experts working together with us to ensure that whatever is stated in declarations find its way to implementation. I think that's important. And then in the case next year, when we are looking at the implementation plan, again, it will not be done in isolation, just policymakers sitting around the table, but the engagement with the health experts, the logistics experts, and the business sector. So you will see, and that's the strength of APEC, really.
Thank you, Dr. Rebecca. We have a question from the Ambassador of Thailand, His Excellency, Ambassador Surya. Would you like to make a comment?
Good morning, Sawadee Krap, and I'd like to thank the organizers, Dr. Rebecca, especially for APEC Secretariat, for organizing this very important meeting to get a sense of the direction of APEC here in 2020 as we move forward to 2021. And obviously, Thailand has an interest waiting in line in 2022. Thank you, Ida, for the presentation on the achievements this year, and of course, also Evangelist for giving us a preview of what will be expected next year. My question is focused on the issue of sustainability. It has taken important significance with, of course, the COVID situation pandemic this year. And as I'm hearing the discussions, the idea is how do we actually translate this vision into action next year? My question is, perhaps starting with Evangelist, how do you see sustainability and its important subset, sustainable development, taking shape within the APEC context as we take forward an attempt to create a continuing growing economy in view of the pandemic, in view of the new normal, and in view of the need to keep supply chains open, but at the same time promote human security and safety, which is a much more important consideration with the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Vangelis, may we start with you?
Yeah, no, thank you. No, a very important question that I think are all grappling with is the immediate crisis that we've all confronted, and now the thing that we've all got to be thinking about is how does the recovery and the resilience then get built in? Now, in there, I would say APEC has had a long tradition of doing interesting things that then get picked up in other institutions and advanced in a much bigger group. So the opportunity, I think, for APEC is in a number of specific areas, and you won't be surprised that for New Zealand we are thinking, and I did use the phrase building back greener and more inclusively as a way to try to frame how we're trying to think about all this. I'm very mindful, for example, that Apec is the institution that first launched environmental goods and services. So this is work that was done a long time ago, and then became the first international list of environmental goods when Russia was hosting Apec. And that set of 54 products is the only actual list internationally of environmental goods. In other words, goods that you lower the tariff for, and you improve the uptake of those products, which then hopefully translates into improved environmental outcomes. So I think the interesting question then is for Apec, so what more might we do there? We know, for example, that the CPC codes that we're using for environmental services are wildly out of date. So what do we need to do? What is it that Apec's contribution might be to define what those services might look like, and pick up the fact that there has been enormous progress over the last 30 years, since the last time in which we looked at those CPC codes in any serious way. I think there's also a question we should ask ourselves about the very important declaration that Malaysia shepherded through, the one Ida was talking about on essential goods. How might we think about the sustainability dimension that brings in? Have we thought enough, for example, about services? So yes, we've got some series of strong and positive messages around goods. Do we need to be thinking about the distribution services? Because for many of the Apec economies, particularly if I may say so, the more distant ones like New Zealand, we discovered that we had no problem getting the goods out, but then we had some challenges in particular distribution hubs where we had particular challenges to face. So is there something that Apec might be thinking about or that it could shed light on there? Then, of course, there's the question of environmentally harmful subsidies, where again, Apec has done some very important work. The peer reviews on fossil fuel subsidies, for example, very significant Apec contribution. Again, shedding light, transparency, what is the scale of the problem? What is the scope of the issues that we need to confront? And then for policymakers to have this in a format that actually allows them to bring that home to capitals and say, listen, here's some important trade-offs we need to be thinking about as we map out our future in terms of whether it's fossil fuels or indeed whether it's fishery subsidies, which is the other classical kind of trade and environment, trade and sustainability question. So there are a number of possible strands and directions one could take this. It is a question for the Apec membership. Certainly New Zealand will be interested in that, but I'm the SOM chair, I'm not the New Zealand representative. I'll be listening to what members will have an interest in, but it seems clear to me that there is an appetite now for people to think quite creatively about how this institution that we all care about might contribute in that space, because sustainability and resilience are absolutely key and they need to work together rather than cut against each other.
Dr. Hugh, the Policy Support Unit has done quite a bit of work on this. May we hear from you?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we've got the Putrajaya Vision 2040, and I think it's highlighted what we do best in APAC, promoting trade and investment, keeping supply chains open. But it also does recognize some of the emerging challenges which will have an impact on sustainable growth. So looking at issues on environmental challenges, trying to move up the technology ladder, to innovate. And I think all these issues are quite important. Many of APEC members are middle-income economies, and even before the pandemic, we were already having concerns about sustainable growth, the often used word middle-income trap. So I think a lot of the APEC policymakers would probably need to look at some of the initiatives that we're doing now, particularly on sustainability.
Thank you, Dennis. Now, we have a question from Ambassador Ignacio Concha from Chile. I understand, Ambassador Concha, that you've just arrived in Singapore. Bienvenidos. May we hear from you?
Good morning. Thank you, Michael. Thank you all, Rebecca in particular, for organizing this video conference, which is very fruitful and interesting. I just want to congratulate Malaysia for its presidency outcomes, and also appreciate the job done by Secretariat along the year. I also wish to welcome New Zealand for taking the lead during this coming year 2021. My country, no doubt, will continue to support both Secretariat and Presidency during the year that is coming. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. For APEC New Zealand's host year, we've heard about building back better and greener from you this morning, Vangelis. There's a question about what will be APEC's approach? How can APEC draw more attention to this issue? And perhaps this also goes to one of your other observations about public engagement and building support for trade.
Look, thank you. Look, I think the key task, as I said in my introductory remarks, is going to be to convert the vision statement into the action plan. And at the heart of the vision is the phrase strong, balanced, secure, sustainable, and inclusive growth. That provides, if you like, the series of hooks onto which we can build an action plan that members can agree in and recognize themselves in. Clearly, members will have their own views, member economies will have their own views about what should appear here and how we might think about that, how we should track progress. That, I think, is going to be the key task for me as the SOM chair, but I will also be saying to members, all right, so how does this look back? I mean, I just provided some examples of some of the things that APEC has done before. I mean, I just want to remind people that APEC played a crucial role in 2000 with a report that it published on fisheries subsidies. That report framed the way in which in Geneva, we then looked to launch the fisheries subsidies negotiations in 2001 out of the Doha round. You know, APEC has a tremendous opportunity here. There is a WTO Ministerial next year as well. And I think members will be wanting to think about how this institution, with its venerable history of substantively pushing and leaning in to other international organizations to really lift ambition and push things forward, because I think all of us in our group, in this body, understand how important trade is to the region and to our future, and that I think is going to be a key driver as to how we then convert, these elements that have come out of the Putrajaya vision. So trade and investment, innovation and digitalization, strong, balanced, secure, sustainable and inclusive growth. Those all need to be then turned over. And the thing that I really like about APEC is it's a consensus-based organization. We can do interesting things in a way that I would argue very few other organizations really can. So this is the strength that we bring as an organization. I don't say as New Zealand, as an institution into the region, thinking creatively, thinking constructively, and thinking in an interesting and interested way about what the future needs to look like for all of us.
Thank you, Vangelis. Dr. Santamaria, drawing on your institutional experience, perhaps you could share with us your knowledge about how APEC has contributed to the areas of green growth in the past. In particular, I'm thinking about the environmental goods list that was agreed by member economies in 2012.
Thank you, Michael. Again, as Vangelis says, a lot of the work that happens in the World Trade Organization format, a lot of the ideas came through from APEC. We incubated the idea. We pushed, we got like-minded economies to think and work together, get enough traction, and then elevate it, move it on to the WTO for a more plurilateral approach, a more multilateral approach to those issues. I think that's the strength of APEC, and we will keep doing it the next year in New Zealand's year. We'll see how we can push more the aspects of green growth.
Thank you, Dr. Santa Maria. Another question from the media, something a bit more broad. They would like to know how the APEC vision translates to people on the ground, to shopkeepers, to SMEs. What are the takeaways for everyday people? Ida, may we start with you?
Thank you, Michael. When we started the process in Malaysia, at least, and in fact, if you refer to a speech that was given by our Prime Minister then, Tun Mahathir, when he launched APEC 2020 on the 4th of December 2019, he said that Malaysia will seek to embed the concept of shared prosperity in the vision. And of course, I tried very hard, but there are, as I had said in my presentation at the beginning, that this is a very well balanced document of people's needs and interests. So we have made sure that that this vision goes further than or builds on the Bogor and goes further to ensure the prosperity for the people of Asia Pacific and the future generations of Asia Pacific. And what that means is that no longer are the initiatives and work, this is our how we see it, that in APEC, no longer our work is solely for the creation of the wealth, but it needs to have a consciousness of what that wealth or prosperity would mean to people on the street, and that is definitely extra that comes with the Putrajaya Vision 2040, and yeah, that is my take on it.
I think it's important to note that as we look at the benefits that accrue from the work that we're doing in APEC, we look at how we impact the lives of the different groups, the women, the small and medium enterprises. How do they benefit from all the facilitation, trade and investment facilitation work that's being done at APEC? And that's where, you know, the collaboration with the business sector really makes sense. You know, policymakers can sit around the table and talk about all the wonderful initiatives and policies that we want to have in place. But really, if that's to have any meaning, to have any traction, the engagement with the small and medium enterprises, that it is through the working group of the small and medium enterprises, but more importantly, the work that we do with ABAC to give you that reality check. Policymakers need that reality check, and we get that from our interaction with the business community, namely through the APEC Business Advisory Council. So that is, you know, something that we will keep doing. And as you know, we all realize this, and we've all, you know, acknowledged how this aspect of the work that we do must be continued. That's one. Two, the engagement with youth and the work that we do through the App Challenge, I think really bringing them in, showing how the work we do has some relevance to the young people. The App Challenge, the work on the gig economy workers, all these provide that reality check or the basis for, you know, making us feel that, you know, yes, you can feel APEC on your skin because you're touching real lives and not just policymakers sitting around the table. Thank you.
Michael, can I?
Thank you, Dr. Santa Maria. Dr. Rohana, could you tell us about the impact from the business community, how APEC is felt there?
Okay, can I also try to answer the previous question as well, if I can? Yeah, that was a very good question, because when you talk about a new vision for APEC, the question is, what does it mean to us, people on the street? Hey, great, you have all this, but what do I get out of this? You know, so I think what's important, you know, you have to realize that since 1989, when APEC was first founded, we don't realize that we have lifted millions and millions of people out of poverty. What is important for the Putrajaya vision, if you look at the three pillars of trade and investment, innovation and digitalization, the last one is strong, balanced, secure, sustainable, inclusive growth. The operating word there is inclusive growth, inclusivity, which means that no one's going to be left behind. And this is the message that we have to get out. When you talk about human resource development, when you are talking about upskilling, reskilling of MISMEs across the board, 98.3% of businesses in Malaysia are MISMEs. You know, so you talk about reskilling, you talk about human resource, and then you're talking about not leaving anyone behind. Various groups are not going to be left behind. And then, of course, we got to put our money where our mouth is with regards to environmental challenge. I think that's very key. If you see what's happening lately in the Philippines with regards to the typhoons and people being uprooted for a few weeks and coming back, so I think there's some really serious issues that APEC has to address, where people can be directly impacted. This is all about the 2.9 billion people in APEC. It cannot be about 21 senior officials, 21, it cannot be about us. It must never, ever be about us. So that's why business gets very excited when we see all these things. Hey, we have to implement this. We have to do this. So MISMEs, to answer the second part of the question, MISMEs is a key part. Because you look at the number of MISMEs represented in all the APEC economies, they are the ones, they are our bread and butter of this country. Without them, hey, where is APEC going to be? When you talk about technology, it's about business again. You got to do all these things. So I think New Zealand, I do apologize, but you guys have a lot of work to do with regards to ensuring that this is about the 2.9 billion people, that they must benefit one way or another. And I will work very closely with Rachel, our incoming chair, to ensure this. And what we're doing, I think, with regards to targeted financial stimulus, making sure that MISME, our digital blueprint, all that is very, very important. And all that is all in our APEC report, in the leaders report, and in the Putrajaya vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rohana. Vangelis, it's true. New Zealand has a lot of work to do. APEC has a lot of work to do. What impact do you see on the implementation plan that will be developed next year on people in the region?
So, I mean, it's a really important question, and I guess, I mean, some work. I mean, I think maybe the first thing to bear in mind is APEC provides an enabling environment and facilitates trade. And some work that we've done in New Zealand here tells us that the benefits of that for people are, if you're an exporter, your income is going to be higher as an individual, 7 to 10% higher. Your productivity is going to be up to a third better than a non-exporting firm. Employment, 1 in 4 New Zealanders' jobs depends on exports. And if you're part of the indigenous Maori community, it's even higher than 1 in 4. And I'm pretty confident that across the region, we'd have similar numbers of the people whose jobs depend actually on trade continuing to flow. And boy, when it doesn't flow, we all know about it, because food doesn't come through, the medicines don't come through. That infrastructure that we need to keep all that going feeds directly back into the economy, into incomes, into, as I said, productivity. And of course, it provides crucially those jobs. So the thing that APEC does very powerfully, it acts as this, I thought Dr. Rebecca put it really well, an incubator for good ideas. And then how those good ideas then get taken up by each of us as individual members, ideally working collaboratively to take them forward. Again, environmental goods is a very good example. So across the region, 54 products where the price of those products has been lowered across the region. So that has real meaning, because people then can buy those products, they're cheaper, and then they will use them, and that will improve both the efficiency and the environmental outcomes of those users of those products. Again, a concrete thing that APEC has contributed, not just to the region actually, but that list of 54 products is of course the reference point for all negotiations in this area. I think the other thing that the Putrajaya vision also does very usefully is makes the point about supply chains. I think many of us had got rather complacent about the way in which we managed trade risks and the way in which we thought about our supply chains and their very diverse points of connectivity across our region. I think if nothing else, COVID has revealed we really need to think about not just the supply chains and their complexity, but their resilience. What we must not do is draw the wrong conclusion from the crisis and say, crikey, that was all pretty scary. Let's reduce the supply chains, narrow them down, let's hunker back. That would be catastrophic. What the crisis has told us is that actually trade is crucial, because none of us, New Zealand may be one of the few that is self-sufficient in food, but none of us is actually self-sufficient in all of the things that our citizens, the people, the shopkeepers that the questioner asked about, the people in the street, none of us is self-sufficient in all of the things that we need. Trade is the thing that will do that, building that resilience and thinking in an APEC context about our region and some of the complexities and the resilience of some of those supply chains. That is how we'll make a real difference to people. Look, I think the very profound challenge the region now faces is that the global economic shock, the twin demand and supply side shock that we've had, is going to have a profound influence on employment across the region. And that has, I mean, as you saw from Dr. Hugh's presentation, that has an impact on employment prospects and has a real impact on incomes. Our challenge in our year, the responsibility, as you put it, and it weighs very heavily on us. Believe me, here in the team here, we really think hard and deeply and with some anxiety about how we're going to do this, because so much rests on it. You know, as I said, jobs, incomes, productivity, the resilience of any recovery across this region hinges on next year getting it right. We have no excuse, because Malaysia really has set it up for us for success. So New Zealand has absolutely no excuse to get this wrong. And we're very, very determined. We're not a country that gets these things wrong.
Thank you, Vangelis. Dr. Hugh, would you like to add your views from the Policy Support Unit?
Sure. I mean, the impact on ordinary people is very real. I mean, this year is like no other year. I mean, there is 74 million people out of work looking for jobs in the APAC region. And according to the World Bank, there's something like 88 to 115 million people, additional people moving to extreme poverty. So the work that we do as we move forward will be quite important. As I mentioned in my presentation, COVID-19 has exacerbated pre-existing challenges that we face, whether it's income inequality, inequality in terms of women in getting employment in both the public and private sector. So a lot of the progress that we've made over the last decade or so has taken a step back because of COVID-19. So I think there's importance in the work that we're doing. That Dr. Rohana talked about promoting SMEs. I mean, they contribute up to 90% of employment in many APAC economies. The work we do on women's empowerment, as well as the future of work, what we need to do in terms of reskilling for future jobs will be quite important as well.
Thank you, Dr. Hugh. And with that, we've come to the end of this briefing today. We'd like to thank the speakers for their presentations, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. For all of the APEC deliverables from APEC 2020, please go to our website. They'll be at www.apec.org. We'd like to thank Malaysia 2020 for its host year, and we're looking forward to APEC New Zealand in 2021. Together, we can advance free trade for Asia-Pacific prosperity. See you all next year. Thank you.